Hello, you're watching the TelecomTV Summit on Telcos and Public Cloud. I'm Daniels, Director of Content. Now, for a number of reasons, it's not uncommon for a telco to have relationships with multiple cloud providers. So why is this a good idea, and how does a telco successfully manage this multi-cloud approach? Are there best practice guidelines for a telco to follow? Well, let's find out. And joining me on the program today are Fatih, who is Chief Technologist, Telco Partner Solutions at Red Hat; Danielle Royston, CEO and founder Telco DR and acting CEO of Totogi; Beth Cohen, SDN Product Strategies at Verizon; and Ildiko Vancher, Director of Community for the Open Infrastructure Foundation. Well, hello everyone. It's good to see you all, and thanks so much for taking part in this discussion. First of all, I would really like to ask, what do we mean when we refer to multi-cloud? What clouds and providers are we talking about? Beth, perhaps we could come to you for a quick summary of what we mean by multi-cloud.
Yeah, I think I'll make it a very quick summary. So multi-cloud to the telco and in general means multiple cloud providers, and it can be both private cloud, i.e., Verizon stands up its own clouds, as well as working with the public cloud providers. So it's really, that's really in a nutshell what it is. It's using combinations of cloud services in conjunction with each other.
Great. So it very much does what it says on the tin there, Beth. It's using these different cloud services as a combination. Right. So that's what multi-cloud is. Next question is, why should a telco have a multi-cloud strategy? And we'll look at the potential downsides and negatives in a moment. But first of all, I'd love to ask, what are the advantages of multi-cloud, and why is it an appealing choice for telcos? Fatih, let's come across to you first.
Like in the analogy that usually households have, say, at least 2 cars, right? Similar to that. So having multiple clouds will give you a resiliency that you're not locked down to one cloud in case something happens, like an outage, which happens all the time, even with public cloud vendors. And also gives you flexibility, as in the sense of to pick which cloud is right for your application or workload type. Say you have a data-intensive applications, say ML, AI, or say stuff around OSS, PSS, you may pick one cloud vendor who is so strong in the data pipelines and ML, AI, as well as they offer cheaper storage solutions, for example. Then you may have another application, not necessarily data-intensive, data crunching, but mainly around front-ending the services for incoming traffic around the world. You may pick another cloud vendor who has a better network backbone around the globe. So the long story short is cost versus benefits versus your business case. Business case, your application type, cost versus picking the right cloud, as well as resiliency for your committed SLAs for your consumers.
Great, thanks so much, Fatih. So one of the takeaways I'm getting from this is you're looking at your particular workloads, and maybe you're matching them with the specialities of a particular cloud vendor. Beth, what are your thoughts? Why would a telco adopt a multi-cloud strategy? What are the advantages?
Well, I think we need to go back to the basics here, which is, why does a telco want to go with cloud at all? And obviously, the advantages are much more efficiency. There's efficiency from energy use. There's efficiency from reduced capital expenditures, and let's not forget, we're not just talking about the public clouds here. Telcos have significant infrastructure that they've stood up that which are not public clouds; they're private clouds, and typically a telco would use both. And as Fatih said, the applications really need to match with the cloud strengths. Each cloud vendor has their own strengths and weaknesses, And so we do match the applications to the cloud vendors, but don't forget, we also have our own clouds, which are typically tuned for network workloads, which I'd say I'd say all of the public cloud vendors are not particularly focused on network workloads per se, because that's not their business model. They're not selling just to the telcos. They're selling to a wide variety of companies that have other types of workloads.
Great. Thanks very much, Beth. And we had a panel discussion yesterday that looked at the unique requirements of telcos when it comes to choosing cloud services. So that is well worth watching for more in-depth information about telco requirements and what makes telcos unique. Ildiko, let's come across to you for your thoughts as to why a telco should adopt a multi-cloud strategy and what are the advantages.
I think Fatih and Beth described it very well in terms of you really just want to stand on multiple legs, and really making sure that you can also match the offering to the applications and the needs and the requirements that you have. When it comes to telecom workloads and telecom services, there are also all kinds of regulations out there. So being able to find providers who can really match that and meet that is really important. At the same time, I would also say that just like beyond using multi-cloud strategy as kind of always having a plan B in case there's an outage. The other thing is that while we will go to the disadvantages later, I think that by working with multiple providers, you also have the chance to know their APIs, be able to do the integration work. So in case you need to switch from one to the other, you're not really dealing with the vendor lock-in that much anymore, because that is something that still happens. No matter how much we are focusing on standards and open APIs, we still do have some vendor lock-in. The different providers have different services. They provide a little bit different APIs or similar APIs with different flavors. So switching over from one to the other can be really, really painful. So if you're doing more kind of hybrid cloud and have an in-house solution and a very similar public cloud end to it, maybe having the same company servicing both, then if you decide to change and use a different provider, then you have to do the setup all from scratch, which kind of means that you're losing a lot of time, money, and you get a lot of delays if you have to do that in a hurry as well. So if you have multiple cloud relationships set up already and depending on multiple providers, then you also know very well how you can optimize those, or if you have to switch from one provider to the other, you don't have an outage between shutting down one system and setting up another one.
Thanks, Ildiko. And, you mentioned hybrid cloud there, and we'll touch on that a little bit later in this discussion. But this leads very nicely onto the disadvantages. What about the downside then? And Danielle, let me come across to you first. What are the main disadvantages for a telco who's looking to adopt a multi-cloud strategy?
Well, you have to remember that the telcos are early days on their move to the public cloud. And when I think about multi-cloud, I think about the three major hyperscalers. And we've seen several MNOs signing multiple agreements with, AWS, Azure, and Google, sometimes all three. But what you have to understand is your IT people and your network people need to understand how to build in these clouds. It's a programming ecosystem, like Ildiko was just talking about. And so it's really hard. It's all fine and good to say, I want to diversify my clouds and move different workloads to different clouds wherever the technology is there. But understand your people that are supporting these applications have to understand the programming ecosystems of each of these clouds. And they're each their own. They have different API signatures, different advantages and disadvantages. And so I tell telcos when I advise them, pick a primary, get to know that really, really well, try to put as much there, and then maybe have a secondary, maybe because of a technology choice or whatever else. But, start by taking your workloads and just moving it to another region. The same workload, same cloud, different region, and you'll realize it's hard. And you want to master this operationally so that you can execute before you start spraying all your workloads across clouds. So I'm against the multi-cloud strategy. I don't think you need to do it for resiliency. Each of the big major public clouds have multiple regions where you can fail over very nicely. You don't need to do it for resiliency. And so start by learning one public cloud really, really well, master that, and then maybe adopt a secondary.
Thanks, Danielle. So don't underestimate the complexities involved with such an approach here. Fatih, we'll come to you in a second, but Beth, let me come across to you for your thoughts on what you see as the potential disadvantages of this approach.
So Danielle brings up a good point. However, a lot of times the multi-cloud approach is sold as a way of, and I think it's a valid approach, as a way of reducing your dependency on a single source. So as Danielle said, each cloud is quite different, and requiring our resources to understand all the complexities of each one of those cloud environments, adds overhead and costs, and of course development effort and time and resources. But we also balance that against you don't want to be stuck with a single cloud provider. And many of our customers, the enterprise companies, have found that. And I would say that the majority of our enterprise customers do, in fact, take multi-cloud approach, and they're not single threaded, and they haven't been for a while. And it's primarily a way of keeping, I'd say, keeping the balance of power between the cloud providers and the telcos in balance.
Oh, that's a good way of looking at it. Thanks very much, Beth. And Fatih, let's come across to you, because there's pros and cons with every strategic choice that telcos take. What are your comments on the disadvantages of multi-cloud?
The right talent that able to manage one cloud, it wouldn't take too long to adopt another cloud. I admit it takes effort, it takes time, it means it's money. But yet, if you want to embrace the single point of failure, sure, go live with it. It's going to happen, it's going to fail. Doesn't matter which region you go in a particular cloud. If network fails, the connecting the regions. So if you want to avoid the SPF, single point of failure, you have to admit you have to have multiple options that is addressing your business needs. Yes, it could be complex. It's all about the talent to bring on board. And also, if you want to embrace, I'm not going to train everybody on different APIs, then you can implement a common layer, abstract layer, hiding the complexity of the cloud from you. We have been hearing a lot of word called cloud brokers nowadays, and it could be an option for you. Thank you.
No, thank you, Fatih. That's interesting. We'll look further into that during this summit, hopefully, and I'm sure we'll get a lot of questions from our audience later about this particular point. But given the pros and cons we've been discussing here, Fatih, I'm going to stay with you for a second, because as you said, you're in your career, you've seen a lot of different perspectives. You've come from this from different angles. Is there an accepted best practice approach that telcos should take, those who are considering adopting a multi-cloud strategy?
In my humble view and experience, the best practice is to educate your in-house talent who's managing these on-premise infrastructures to adopt new technologies better and faster. You may boost the education or know-how level with new hirings, but you have to make sure those new hirings are part of the team spirit so they can share the knowledge. That's the main best practice, is all about the talent with the right skill set and right mindset, and also distribute the mindset of cloud is not free. It is not like on-premise. When you turn on a machine, if you don't care to turn it off, it will keep burning money for you. So you have to admit, and you have to embrace the power of cloud with the downside of this is not a paid infrastructure. This is an ongoing payment. So I have to educate my whole organization who's consuming cloud, not only the operations teams, but also business teams as well, with the right mindset. I think that's main key, I would say, best practice.
Yeah, thanks, Fatih. And I'm sure a lot of our audience are already learning this lesson about how the bills keep coming in this scenario. But Ildiko, let me come across to you, because I'm sure what Fatih says there about talent it resonates within your community.
Yes, it definitely does. And I'm with a nonprofit organization, the Open Infra Foundation, and we are supporting open source software development communities. So when it comes to talent, then it's definitely an area that I think plays within the multi-cloud topic area as well, in terms of, it's one thing to say that I have a cloud in-house and I have to make sure that my people learn all the various public cloud options out there. I think that going a step further, you can also look into open source based solutions. There are open source based public clouds out there, public cloud providers. For instance, I think there are over 300 data centers, public cloud data centers powered by OpenStack all around the globe. So it's not only the hyperscalers that are an option. And when it comes to finding talent, if you're choosing a solution that uses open source components, then you will find a bigger pool of people who have the base knowledge of what's in the core of that cloud solution, even if the APIs are not 100% the open source de facto APIs. There might be extensions to it, or some deviations, differentiating factors that a provider added. But at the same time, the basic knowledge of what's in the core, you will find more people who do understand that. And the other thing that is really nice about looking for open source solutions and open APIs is that it's much harder to be logged in and be 100% dependent on a provider. Because when we talk about cost, leaving a machine running is one thing, but the other thing is when the service changes, and if you're only dependent on like one provider, then they can practically do whatever they want. And you will have to follow at some point.
Great, thanks very much, Ildiko. Well, let's bring in our other guests on this topic about best practice and advice for telcos. And I'm going to start with Beth.
So Ildiko and Fatih have both made great points, but there's another factor, which is that the overhead. I'd say best practices are around making sure that the workloads are stable. Telcos, of course, are very concerned with that. And one thing that we have found with public cloud is that they tend to be much less stable over time, because they change. There's a lot of changes in the underlying infrastructure, which require us to stay up to date, which there's a lot of overhead in maintaining things at up to date. One factor is that telco workloads tend to be extremely stable. So telcos themselves, and I'll use the example of OpenStack. There's a whole lot of telcos that are running on pretty old versions of OpenStack, and it's not because they don't want to move to the latest version. It's just it's a lot of work to move to the latest version, and so over time, the workloads tend to kind of settle, and they don't want to change as fast, and the telcos, and again, this applies to enterprises as well, but even more so with telcos, they don't want to change because adding the latest features may or may not be a benefit, right? We might want to go to a new version because there's a very important feature that was added. On the other hand, we don't want to move to a new version for just the sake of being at the latest version.
No, so it's great point, Beth, and it's it's an important consideration for telcos, and it goes back to again yesterday's panel with the unique aspects and unique requirements of telcos. Danielle, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but I just want to go back quickly to Fatih first, because I think Fatih, you wanted to pick up on a comment that was made earlier.
Yes. So all of us point to the importance of the talent in-house to able to handle multiple cloud as a strategy, as a deployment model, as an operational model. And although talent could be hard to accelerate the know-how, but yet we are in 2023. If someone asks me later in my life, what do you remember from 2023? I would say definitely the rise of GPT, especially Chat GPT enabling me, at least as an engineer, to write, say, Ansible playbook to migrate a workload from one particular cloud vendor to another. It has been much, much simpler and easier now, thanks to the rise of AI in practice. That's all I want to add. We are living interesting times. The problems that we had before with talent and accelerated know-how may not be a problem in the coming times, and that will make our life easier with multiple cloud.
Interesting perspective there, Fatih. Thank you very much. And as we are seeing and reading about as we speak about how these systems are writing code, or at least 95% of code, and reducing the amount of human effort required. Danielle, let me come across to you, because earlier you were talking about the potential disadvantages and the complexities of a multi-cloud strategy. What are your thoughts for best practices, and what are your thoughts for those telcos who are considering this route?
Yeah, like I said before, I think you really need to standardize around one public cloud and get to know that really well. It's hard. You got to learn all the ecosystem, the APIs, which tools to use when. You got engineers now are required to understand the pricing behind the tools that they pick, because they're running all the time. And so there may be different strategies for the technology that you pick. This is hard work. I kind of, want to remind the panelists, let's get real, right? Like, you don't have infinite time in a competitive market place against other MNOs. You don't have infinite resources. You don't have infinite budget. And so leaders have to make pragmatic decisions around their strategy and what they're going to pick. So you can't pick open source, free, cloud agnostic, use them all at once. You really have to put together a plan so that you are successful, and you're successful in this lifetime. I mean, the talk at MWC is, where's the ROI on the investment on 5G, right? And public cloud is a big component to advancing telco's capability in putting out services more quickly and more cheaply. I mean, this is the thing facing our industry. There's a great technology out there for us to use. Is it a double-edged sword? It is, right? There's things like vendor lock-in. There's things like picking the right cloud. There's all these things, but that's what the strategy is all about. You got to pick a direction. You got to row towards that. And you can't row towards all the directions at once. You can't pick all the clouds and all the things and have it be agnostic and cheap. It just doesn't work. That's just not reality. So I tell telcos, pick one, get really good at that. Understand the pricing, optimize on the pricing. And then if you're going to go to a second cloud, it needs to be a really good reason. Like, the technology needs to be twice as good or half the cost. Big reasons to go branching out into all this other technology. This is hard, and you need to be very good at it.
Thank you, Danielle. It's good to have great, strong advice from all our panelists on this area, because, as you say, it's you've got to plan very, very carefully, and then you've got to execute. Now, we talked multi-cloud. There is a linkage with hybrid cloud. So hybrid cloud was mentioned earlier in our discussion. Where does this leave the hybrid cloud? What actually differentiates the hybrid cloud from the multi-cloud? And should we be a little bit careful when we use these two terms? And Fatih, let me come across to you first.
So when you look at the Wikipedia definition sort of thing for the hybrid cloud, it's kind of hinting that the mixing on-premise IT infrastructure with the public cloud provider. That's the definition. But when you think a little bit further, okay, on-premise IT infrastructure and then public cloud. Yet my private cloud, as Beth was hinting, say Verizon private cloud, VPC, if I mix my private cloud with public, is it going to be multi-cloud or is it going to be hybrid cloud? To me, it's just a potato thing. But in reality, say, okay, let's buy the book. On-premise IT infrastructure, say your database backends running on-premise, and you want to leverage the scale of economy with public cloud, put your front ends, but yet you have to be cautious tying those two dots together because your front end should talk to your back end. Is there a benefit? Yes, there is a benefit. You're going to have the power of cloud for scaling up and down the cost, as Danielle was pointing, the cost factor. And also, you will not sacrifice from the regulatory compliance issues because that data cannot be hosted on cloud, so you're still keeping on-premise. So hybrid cloud, TLDR, too long to read if you don't want to listen too long, is a reality. You have to keep some part of your application portfolio on-premise, and some you may move to cloud. They don't need to be segregated or disconnected. You can implement secure private connections from public cloud to the on-premise, yet offer an end-to-end service experience to your consumers.
Excellent, Fatih. Thanks very much indeed. And it's always potato with me. Danielle, hybrid cloud, it's a reality. Telcos have the different needs. What are your thoughts about how we cope with that and how we approach hybrid cloud against multi-cloud?
So I always tell telcos you should consider hybrid cloud temporary cloud as you're trying as much as possible to move to public cloud. I mean, obviously I'm the public cloud evangelist, so I think as much as possible should be running in the public cloud. So using that hybrid state is just a temporary transitionary state as you move things to public cloud. And if you have to, and that is reality, there are some things that just you have to have in a hybrid situation, minimizing it as much as possible. Because understand what happens when you have a hybrid application. It forces you to pick technology that works both on-prem and in the public cloud. And sometimes there is technology in the public cloud that's just demonstrably better. And so when you don't get to pick those tools, it might make your application more expensive to run or less efficient and all these other. So you're having to make these trade-offs.
Beth, how do you see hybrid cloud sitting with multi-cloud strategies?
I think hybrid cloud is essential. I actually disagree with Danielle because I think there are some regulations specifically. I'm mentioning CALIA in the U.S., but there are others that require the cloud providers, or rather the infrastructure, to support access for regulatory and law enforcement reasons. And we have found that actually the public cloud providers are not actually very well set up for that. And that's actually a significant problem for us as well as our customers. So I think that there's always going to be a need for hybrid cloud of some sort. And I should also point out that, telcos, I mean, certainly Verizon and, AT&T and some of the bigger telcos, when you're talking about on-prem, it's not on-prem. We're talking about data centers. And, the data centers in some cases are just as massive as the public cloud, infrastructure, because that's the kind of infrastructure that we need to support. And, then the next question is, does it make sense to move at least some of the workloads into the public cloud, particularly the more elastic ones, which is what many companies use the public cloud for? So I personally think there'll be a need for hybrid cloud pretty much going forward until for a long time, anyhow.
Thanks very much, Beth. And again, this whole issue of what's the workload we're talking about here and where does it best fit? Ildiko, let me come across to you before we get to our next question. Let me come across to you for your thoughts on hybrid cloud.
Yes, I just wanted to say that when we talk about hybrid clouds, what the term practically means is that you're extending your on-premises cloud into a public cloud. And I would also like to point out that when we talk about private cloud, even that has multiple ways to spin it up. Like the concept of remotely managed private cloud exists. Like the servers are on your premises, but it's not you who's managing them. So in that sense, hybrid cloud really is talking about someone managing the infrastructure, and you're still sort of depending on one provider in the hybrid cloud scenario. The multi-cloud at the same time rather talks about having dependencies and having relationships with multiple providers. And we talked about why that is good or bad. I would also like to mention that I understand the points that Danielle was bringing up. And I think that it is really important how the clouds are managed, and at the same time, what methods you're using when you're utilizing both the private clouds and the public clouds in order to be able to connect the two, or in case of a multi-cloud strategy, being able to manage the infrastructures efficiently, as well as the application layer on top efficiently. And using, again, open source and open APIs can help a lot with that.
Thanks very much, Ildiko. Well, I've got one more question for all of you before we close the discussion today, and that's about the trend we're seeing towards repatriation. And it is a bit of a trend. It's been going on for a few years. This idea of bringing workloads back on-prem. What impact might this be having on telcos and their public cloud strategies? And Danielle, I want to put this one to you first.
Well, I tell people, if you're going to build for repatriation in the first place as you're moving to the public cloud, I'm like, don't even bother moving to the public cloud. Just keep it on-prem, right? The whole idea around using the public cloud is using the custom chips, the awesome cloud databases, the software that they're providing. That's the whole point. That's the whole idea here. It's better tech. You can run things more cheaply. You can, utilize their regions. That's why you use the public cloud. And if you're going to move in and just use it for the infrastructure, right, the management as a data center, don't even bother. And so I know there's been some voices in our industry and out of our industry saying, oh, public cloud's only for small players or for workloads that don't matter. Or, we tried it and we're going to save a bunch of money by moving back on. But you're just adding your own headache to your own headache, where you need to source all of these components, right? Building up, and I'm sure Fatih can share how hard it is to build a private cloud. There's 1,000 technical decisions you need to make, right? Besides, I'm going to go build a private cloud. And what's so great about the public cloud is it's there running for you, managed for you, chips getting put out, and with literally finger strokes, you can move workloads. So if you're going to move the public cloud, do it with 2 feet in. Don't do it 1 foot out the door with a plan to move back. It's a complete waste of time and energy, and just stay on-prem. But if you want all these benefits, then I say, dive in. Go for it.
Go for it. Thank you, Danielle. Of course, we read about this a lot at the moment. The high level of egress fees, for example, doesn't make it very compelling for someone who might be having second thoughts or want to switch providers. But as you say, you make a decision, you plan carefully, and once you've got the business case in hand, then go for it. Fatih, Danielle mentioned you in her response just then. What are your thoughts there about the trend we are seeing towards repatriation? And it might be only a small trend, and it might ebb and flow over the years. But what are your thoughts?
I cannot believe I'm going to say this, but I'm kind of agreeing with Danielle here. The reality is, if you're eating a meal, you don't have to eat it only one small spoon. You can eat with a bigger spoon or a small spoon. You can change it. What I'm trying to hint you is, we recently published an article called Circle of Life for migration from on-premise to the cloud and cloud to on-premise. And we try to put the reasoning behind these. And we also mentioned that, as in the circle of life, this is not a one-time effort to move to the cloud as a goal, rush to gold, or coming back to motherland because it's so expensive we couldn't manage it. You can still change your decisions over time. Okay, let me put a perspective. In certain times of the year, there is a traffic increase over particular applications, and the shopping is boosted in this week and coming weekend. And also there's other shopping seasons too. So what if you could just burst your infrastructure, existing infrastructure on-prem, into a cloud dynamically for a short period of time and handle the traffic increase, because that traffic is not there to stay as is. It's going to go up and down based on time of the year, demand of the product, and so on and so forth. You can still go between on-premise and cloud if you embrace automation. Key part here is, yes, I have a talent. And yes, I could automate, say, 90% of my deployments and operation job. You can still embrace the power of cloud with bursting into cloud and coming back to motherland on-prem. So it doesn't have to be either. It could be both. You can leverage both technology and infrastructure types.
Okay, so not a either or choice there. It could be both. Beth, what are your thoughts on this particular quite vexing topic?
I want to pick up on what Fatih said, because I think that's absolutely spot on. And we know, the high profile companies that moved, that started in some of the big cloud providers, and then, they did the math, right? They looked at the math and then decided to build their own data centers, but they're not giving up on the public cloud completely. They're continuing to use the public cloud. However, they're using it for their elastic workloads. So that allows them to build infrastructure that more cheaply, because they can basically they don't need to overbuild for overcapacity. And the telcos do the same thing too as well. I mean, telcos suffer from a great need for overcapacity. And particularly 5G, as we kind of work through, exactly what that means and how it gets used. And, there's a whole bunch of different issues that are adding to the complexity of how you use the clouds and how you use the hybrid cloud, that adds, a huge amount of complexity to what's already a complex situation. But the other important factor to remember is that when you're using the multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, you are giving over a certain amount of autonomy that you previously had. And telcos tend to have a lot of autonomy to the cloud provider. And that might be okay, or it might not be okay. I mean, I've had some, I would say fairly tense negotiations with some of the major cloud providers, where they fundamentally did not have a good understanding of what the telco workloads were all about. And, they were, insisting upon, contracts that did it sort of their way. And, that's another factor that, telcos have to think about. Telcos are used to doing it themselves, and, giving over power to your partner changes the dynamics.
Oh, quite right, Beth. And it can't be easy for a lot of telcos, that. Danielle, I'm going to come to you in a moment, but first of all, some quick comments to wrap from Ildiko.
Yes, I just wanted to say that I think, in my observation, we have a lot of trends everywhere, both in IT and just in other aspects of our lives. Just look at the clothing trends that are coming back from the 80s and 90s. So I think that the same thing goes for the cloud choices and technology in terms of how something is architected. So when it comes to moving from private to public and then from public to private, I think that some of it is practically the learning curve. I've done private cloud, and the public cloud now seems much more desirable. I don't have to deal with all kinds of things. And then I try public cloud, and then I realize that the dependency on that public cloud provider is just way too much. The fine print that I didn't read at the beginning is also starting to cost me a lot. And I don't have all that authority that I would need or want to have. And as I think it was Beth who mentioned that there are some workloads, and I think it was Fatih who mentioned that there's some data that you just can't really move into a public cloud no matter what you do. at least not today. And I think that it all just really goes back to being always prepared to change and look how technology evolves, look how your own needs and requirements evolve, and just be ready to move to whatever you need at a given time.
Thank you very much, Ildiko. And we've just got time to go across to Danielle for some final thoughts here, because Danielle, I guess, as with all decisions telcos make, they're going to be wanting to make changes. There's going to be people within the organizations thinking, we've got to get out of here. We've got to take a different strategy now for various reasons. What are your final thoughts on this question about repatriation from the cloud?
Yeah, so I think, I like to look at JP Morgan Chase and the CEO, Jamie Dimon, who banking, but regulated, different than telco, but similar, some similar challenges. And he kind of started talking like we used to talk, can't do it, or I'm going to do my unimportant workloads, but my crown jewels, I've built these big data centers, I'm going to use them. And, I think it was in his last, not this year's shareholder letter, but the one before, he was like, if I could spend $2 billion to get to the public cloud faster, I would do it in a heartbeat. And this is an organization that started against the public cloud and now is all in on the public cloud. And so, again, for the telco executives out there that are wrestling with this very real problem, if you're wondering, does it work? Can I trust them? How do I get my people trained? I advise them to move workloads that are two-way doors. Workloads that you can move on and move back pretty easily without a lot of investment. Start to learn the tools, start to understand how that process works, but get familiar with it. But I bet you what's going to happen, that as your technical people get experience with these tools and these services, the flywheel of imagination of what could be and how things could be better and faster and cheaper and better for your subscribers just takes off, right? It's just the imagination of these people of what can happen. And so as you move more and more things in your ecosystem and your public cloud is growing, then start to tackle your one-way door workloads. Those workloads that once you move them are incredibly difficult to move back. And so I think that's a good strategy for people who are starting their journey, dipping their toe in the water, pick some two-way door workloads first. But I bet you your team is going to love the public cloud, and they're going to want to learn more, want to use all these components. They're going to forget the days of OpenStack, which are so hard to implement. And they're like, we want to go to this new modern world. It's great for your people. These new tools help them get higher pay working for the public clouds themselves. It's great for them. It's great for your organization. And so I say, go to the public cloud.
Go to the public cloud. Thank you, Danielle. And we've just got time to squeeze in some final comments from Fatih.
Yeah, this last AWS reInvent at Vegas last December, I was walking around and I saw a lot of folks from the same financial institution, and I asked them, how many are you here for the event? They said like around 250 people. I said, wow. And even they said, you know what, we actually booked our own airplane to come in here as a company. That's FSI, it's a financial institution. So when I looked at the telco side of the house, I saw one or two folks from particular tier ones, and I said, what's going on? You used to come at least, the whole department. They said, we have a budget cut, and I think it's going to be much worse next year. In next year, which right now we are living, 2023, everybody talking about the year of efficiency. That's the theme of the year of efficiency. From Facebook down to the AT&T, from AT&T down to any startup. Year of efficiency versus cloud could be convenient for you, but is it really efficient for your budget versus what you're aiming to get as a revenue? That's the dilemma, I think.
Yeah, it's a serious dilemma, Fatih. You're absolutely right. Now, we must leave it there. Thank you all very much indeed for taking part today and sharing your views. If you are watching this on day 2 of our Telco and Public Cloud Summit, then please send us your questions, because after this discussion, I'm sure you've got a lot of questions. We want to hear from you, and we'll answer them, or as many of them as we can, in our live Q&A show, which is coming up very soon. And don't forget to view our other panel discussion and keynote interviews in this year's summit. For now, though, thanks for watching and goodbye.